Hey everybody, I'm Lindsay Vallandigham with the Symphony Group at Keller Williams Louisville East, joined today by Zach Schell from Statewide Mortgage. We both operate our businesses here in Louisville, Kentucky, and serve the Kentucky market and the Southern Indiana market. Real estate agents received an email from the National Association of Realtors on Friday morning, March 15th. We got the information just a couple minutes before the public did. That email outlines what the changes that NAR is suggesting as part of this settlement to our day-to-day operations as real estate agents, as mortgage lenders, will be impacted. And I think that's the one piece of this entire conversation that sort of hasn't been picked up by the media, is what the two actual changes are. To lay the groundwork, to give us a basis for what we're talking about a settlement that the National Association of Realtors made against the class action lawsuit, commonly referred to as Sitzer-Burnett, brought on by hundreds of individuals, about the commissions and the way that real estate agents are paid and have been paid in the past. NAR's settlement, National Association of Realtors, to start, isn't finalized yet. And the reason for that is that all class action settlements do have to be approved by the Department of Justice. We are still waiting for that approval to come through. Without that approval, we're kind of talking in assumptions at the moment. Hypotheticals, exactly. We can kind of share what we know and what the settlement actually says. The two proposed changes are, number one, that any buyer represented by a real estate agent is going to have a contract of agreement between the buyer and their agent. It's not new, but it has not necessarily been required. Real estate agents and the seller have always had a listing agreement that dictates the sale price of the house, the address, and how much commission would be paid. And in the same way, buyers will now have an agreement with their realtor that says this is how much the realtor is going to be paid. And item number two, we cannot publicize or advertise what we call cooperating commission in the MLS. The way that buyer's agents have been paid in the past is that the seller and the seller's agent have an agreed upon commission, and the seller and the seller's agent agree that some portion of that commission would be shared from the seller's brokerage to the buyer's brokerage. If you have a 5% commission being paid to your listing agent, that listing agent might then decide to turn around and pay 2.5% to the buyer's brokerage who brings the buyer, just as an example. Now, in the past, whatever that agreed upon cooperating commission that was going to be paid to the buyer's agent, whatever that was, that listing agent builds the MLS out, puts all the pictures up, puts the description and the directions and how many bedrooms and bathrooms and everything else, would also have a field that indicated how much they were going to pay the buyer's brokerage. As a listing agent, I would type in 2.5% being paid to the buyer's brokerage. With this NAR settlement, we're no longer able to advertise that number. I don't think that this necessarily changes the way that you're going to work with your buyer's agent in moving forward, because frankly, we still, in spite of all of this, have a huge inventory shortage in our market here in Kentucky and in Southern Indiana. There seems to be a lot of news articles that say that, the defined commission is gone or it's changed or whatever. And the fact of the matter is there has never been any sort of set commission. Every agent can set their own rules when it comes to commission. They can decide for themselves what they are or are not going to take for a commission. The same, is true of brokerages and everything else. There isn't some magic number that everyone uses. Everything is negotiable in the end and continues to be negotiable moving forward. So with that said, I wanted to dive in a little bit with Zach around how this can impact our buyers.
Yeah.
Because the mortgage side of things is certainly going to experience some change.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I'm here to find out from your perspective, what does this look like for our average Louisville buyer? And I think our average market price right now is $285,000. So let's assume we've got a $300,000 buyer on our hands, a sort of an average buyer. And what does this mean for them?
Like we said, as all this gets negotiated out and gets settled, then, that's when I think we could potentially see future changes to kind of our rules and regulations in the mortgage industry. But the popular topic for us has been, what are max seller concessions? How can those be used to help offset costs for buyers?
What is a seller concession?
So a seller concession is where a buyer asks the seller to pay a percentage or a dollar amount of their closing costs. So it could be a percentage, a $300,000 house. They could say, hey, I want 1% in seller concessions, which would be $3,000. Or they could say, hey, I'm asking the seller to cover $2,000 of my closing costs.
Okay.
So it's just a predetermined amount based off of a percentage or a dollar amount that the seller is going to give from their net proceeds to help offset the buyer's closing costs or fees. And so that's been super popular. Those range depending upon the loan program, and then even within the loan program for conventional, as an example, it can range depending upon how much money you're putting down. So we'll plug a little picture of what all the seller concessions are. But part of why that's being brought up is because for conventional loans and for FHA loans, you can work in some of the buyer's agent's commissions into the purchase closing costs for the buyer.
Sure.
So there's the potential there that you could get seller concessions to still help pay the buyer's agent. However, on the flip side of that right now, as it stands for VA buyers and for USDA buyers, you cannot have any realtor fees or brokerage fees in that closing cost disclosure. So that's kind of the buzz in the mortgage industry, is figuring out, are they going to change that for VA and USDA to where, all realtor commissions can be covered in any loan type? Do we think that maybe the max seller concessions will be expanded? Do we think loan values will be changed or manipulated to where maybe you can start rolling in, a buyer's agent's commission into your loan value? And so those are the kind of things that we're ideating around on right now.
Sure.
And again, I think on our side of things in the mortgage industry, I think they will sit back a little bit, wait for the dust to settle to see what the final is in the, on the realtor side of things. And then that's when, we'll probably start to see some policies being talked about, see if guidelines and things get updated.
Absolutely. And I think the reason that we're having this conversation around the potential for seller concessions and things is because there is an idea that perhaps sellers may start to elect not to pay a cooperating commission to a buyer's agent. Again, they could have decided that all along. There's no reason that they couldn't have chosen to not offer a cooperating commission to a buyer's agent at any point in history. So I'm not totally clear on why that has all of a sudden come out of, again, these two things that have come up, which is the idea that you have to have a contract with your buyer representative and that you cannot advertise the cooperating commission. But a lot of the dialogue that's come out of this is that all of a sudden maybe the seller won't be willing to offer a buyer's cooperating commission. And maybe that's something that happens. But I think at the end of the day, we also really want to explore what that looks like if we have sellers who aren't interested in paying a buyer cooperating commission. Having buyer representation is still very valuable to the seller, and ultimately could make the seller still have the highest net profit possible in spite of the fact that they're still paying a buyer's agent representative. So I think there's a lot to work around there, but our sellers in this market in Louisville and surrounding areas have always realized the value of having their buyer be represented in one way, shape, or form, because they're going to get a stronger buyer who's able to close more quickly, who understands the process and is able to negotiate well because they are represented, rather than attempting to do something that they don't do, but maybe once or twice in their life. So I think that there's a lot of value in continuing to offer a buyer's co-op commission, buyer's agent cooperating commission.
If I'm having you help me sell my house, I'm going to need somewhere else to live next time. So then I'm still going to turn around and pay you to help me buy my next house. So, I think even looking at it through that lens of will sellers really eliminate that buyer's commission, because they know they're going to see, I would hope that they would see that value in paying for both.
Right.
Because if you're a seller, you're equally going to turn into a buyer unless you choose to go unrepresented. So
most sellers are also eventually buyers, and so essentially, it's kind of six one way, half dozen the other.
Moving one fee from here over to here.
Right. We're just kind of moving money around in the same categories here. So I think at the end of the day, what Zach and I really want for you to do is to talk to your realtor, your lender. Call them and ask them what this really means, rather than relying maybe on the media who is sharing parts of the story that maybe, after hearing this video, you weren't even aware of. That the two notes to come out of this case are related to buyer agency agreements and the advertising of cooperating commission. Those are the two key points. There isn't anything else in there with regard to how commission is paid, and yet the media is blowing up a story around that. So call someone that you trust that's in the industry. Call your realtor, call your lender, call someone that probably has a little bit of inside scoop, and figure out what this means for you. Because I think every individual is going to have a little bit of a different scenario, as you mentioned, depending on their loan type. We are always at the Symphony Group looking to help you find your perfect key. Reach out to us anytime at symphonyrealtygroup@gmail.com.